I feel like there's nobody out there that despises Doomfist more than Doomfist Main. I mean, sure, on this planet, in this universe, within our current timeline, it is a very popular thing to hate on that character. But you know things are bad when you achieve the trifecta of hatred in which not only your enemies hate you, even your allies can't stand to fight alongside you, and you can't help but admit that you hate yourself. Besides being an off-meta trash pick, Doomfist is so incredibly buggy that Blizzard cheeses you out of more eliminations than Immortality Field does. I wish I could show you a highlight montage of said bugs at display, but I don't play the character enough to fill the runtime, so I'm just gonna have to take their word for it. Doomfist is the definition of because I can. There's no reason to play him besides an intrinsic desire to hate yourself, and if it wasn't for the simple fact that mobility-based characters are fun, I believe that he would see even less playtime than Bastion. But does he deserve all that hate? Honestly guys, you haven't seen a lot of Doomfist in my stories recently because barely anyone plays him in my lobbies. That's how much he's struggling. So for today's episode, we are going to spectate and commentate the adventures of a Doomfist One Trick, an endangered species of player that more than anyone else direly needs our help. After all, they cannot rely on the support of amazing sponsors like Tipsy. Tipsy's on a mission to make your sake experience even better. I'm gonna be real, knowing absolutely nothing about sake, I was lost trying to find out where to start. So if you're anything like me and you always wanted to try it out, Tipsy's offering a quarterly subscription service, the Sake Box, for you to explore the profound world of sake. Each box includes 6 mini tasting bottles that were carefully picked by their sake professionals, as well as a product information card for each bottle, so you know what you're actually drinking. And much like wine, specific types of sake are best paired with certain types of food, which Tipsy can help you with thanks to their expert tasting videos in which they talk about the best pairings. Tipsy goes to great lengths to break the barrier between consumers and the makers of sake, not only by making it as approachable as possible to find the sake you like, but also by turning it into a cultural experience that highlights who makes the product you're consuming. And if you do decide to become a Sake Box member, you will enjoy benefits such as unlimited free shipping for regular orders and 6% cashback in reward points. So if all that does catch your interest, check out the link in the description below and make sure to use promo code CLIFF to save $20 on your first purchase. And with that, I hope you enjoy your cultural deep dive into the world of sake. Thanks to Tipsy for sponsoring today's video, and now, onto our standard programming. Now, leading up to me making this episode, I decided to ask my community what they think about Doomfist's place in the game, and well, if you weren't already under the impression that he direly needs a change in PR strategy, then seeing that a staggering 43% of my viewers can't stand his face might convince you. With him celebrating a measly 17% approval rate, I don't think there's a question about his position as the underdog in today's story. The challenge is convincing the other 83% of you that he's worthy of your support. And I mean, does Doomfist really deserve your hate in a game where other characters are arguably just as annoying while seeing much more playtime? Brigitte becomes a nearly unkillable demigod every time she hits the Q button, and it's not like she has to study the vast catalog of rollout tutorials on YouTube to get any value. Hammond players are defending his ridiculous levels of survivability by saying that it's balanced because if all 6 enemy players use all of their cooldowns at the same time, there's a chance that he might, maybe, not make it out alive. And need I remind you that Echo is still a character in this game that somehow got past the design stages? Listen, all I'm saying is that maybe we shouldn't give the lonely kid in the corner such a hard time when there are literally bands of bullies roaming the streets. But I get it, Doomfist is annoying to play against and nothing I say can change that. However, maybe seeing a game through the lens of a Doomfist OTP is going to help you understand his struggle. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, our story today takes place on Eichenwalds. Our hero for today is what I would describe as the de facto average Doomfist player. Feel free to leave your suggestions in the comments below about what rank you believe our friend over here manages to hold, but rest assured knowing that they know a thing or two about how to play their hero. And that expertise would definitely be put to the test, because while it would be a stretch to assume that the defenders knew of every Doomfist rollout present on this map, our hero would soon learn that their team play was not easily broken. For a bit of a change of pace, we are cheering for the red team today, so let's get this show on the road and see how they approach their offense. The answer is, very creatively, Swapless the Doomfist One Trick immediately flexed how many wrinkles his brain has by setting up for a big rollout from the top ropes. But before he could even complete the first step of his combo, his main tank somehow found a way to feed his brains out. I mean, honestly, the way Ubercup was just kind of walking into the enemies, it really seemed like they had a death wish, one which the blue team was happy to grant. That put Swapless in an awkward position, because if he was to just yeet into the defenders right now, he would certainly share the same fate as his Reinhardt, and as such, to the untrained eye, this may appear as though he was was just standing around doing nothing. The attackers needed space to advance towards the objective, but it didn't seem like their Reinhardt was very reliable when it came to the acquisition of real estate. As such, Kami, the red team's second DPS, felt it was their duty to achieve what their main tank couldn't. With the blue team's attention now being on his Pharah, Swapless knew that this was as good a time as ever to strike. With an expert maneuver over the rooftop, he was sure to surprise the blue team. A swift assassination gave his team the edge, and he even managed to get back out in time to save his own life. Meanwhile, Ubercup was still getting bullied by the defenders. Though he wasn't the only tank in trouble, our heroes were gaining ground, and the opposing Sigma player Inferno was feeling the heat. It wasn't long until the defensive lineup would fall to pieces, and it all began with this elimination. Swapless was in full carry mode at this point. There was no force powerful enough to stop him from putting the rest of his team on his back, though that does not mean that he is reckless. Our hero knew that waiting for Discord Orb to run out was the smart play, and considering how much of a back foot the defenders were on, he had time to spare. This Doomfist had a mighty presence about him, one which forced the enemy Zenyatta to blow Transcendence in response to his dive, on top of scaring the enemy Ana into fat fingering their nano boost. Plasma Kitten on Zen felt the need to somehow make use of the last couple seconds of the boost, but to say that he was flustered would be an understatement. As a Zenyatta main myself, I would have walked past the shield to finish the purple Reinhardt, which would allow me to camp his body in a cramped space that makes rezzing him in my presence more dangerous. But instead, Plasma's fear of Swapless affected his decision making to try and go for the Mercy instead, who is a much more difficult target to hit. By the time the healing debuff ran out, nano boost was gone as well, and the red team had no trouble wiping the floor with him. Despite an undeniably bad start for the attackers, they succeeded in turning the ship around to capture the objective on their very next attempt. Just as undeniable is the fact that Swapless was in big part responsible for his team's success, so let's find out if he can keep up that performance. The blue team knew that they were in trouble. A split spawn often spells doom for the defenders, but submitting space for free could be just as detrimental, prompting them to make the decision to hold their ground. This was a mistake Swapless was happy to make use of, utilizing his vastly superior game sense and mechanical skill to come crashing down on Plasma like a freaking Predator missile. All he had to do was make a daring escape following his display of skill, though what happened next was nothing short of unlucky. Let's just say that our hero miscalculated the landing and accidentally ended up back in the spawn room. To make matters worse, the rest of his team was not having a good time considering the absence of his carry performance. Kami was getting rolled by the blue team's Metro, and the rest of the attackers decided that losing 2 DPS was reason enough to just stay on the payload. But as it turned out, the payload was no safe space either, because the defenders rolled up on them with their ultimates to stop their advance then and there. The defenders definitely had a chip on their shoulder. The slightest hint of distraction was enough for them to get dismantled before, meaning that their game plan included just not letting the red team set up any sort of combo in the first place. Considering Ubercup's current occupation as ult charge Pinata, you can imagine that they were not happy about how their attack round has been going. And while I can't say that they did a much better job at staying alive, they did make a valiant effort to open up the fight for the rest of their team. Despite having lost 2 members of their team already, Nacho Friend and Diva decide to toss their ultimate into the mix as well, and thanks to Ubercup's sacrifice, will be rewarded with 2 eliminations. It was Hanzo hunting season now. Swapless had set his sight on his prey and was not planning to let them go. Sonic Arrow might tell them what is coming, but that does not mean that they'd be able to stop it, and after a short-lived chase, our hero would claim another elimination. Though as much as our Doomfist can attack, he can also protect. Considering his Reinhardt spent more time kissing the floor than not, Swapless took up the mantle of main tank and bravely fought the enemy Diva, aiming to slow down their advance. But as long as the enemy Ana kept pumping healing to their tanks, there was no way Swapless could force them off the objective for good. Blizzard should definitely consider buffing Doomfist so that he can one-shot tanks as well. I mean, look at this ridiculous stalling nonsense. How come a DPS hero isn't even dealing enough damage to do as much as threatening a tank? The fight kept raging on with no team crystallizing as an obvious winner. Kami tried to dive bomb the backline to turn the tides, but Pharah is not exactly known to survive her own barrage, and as such, it did little to further their push. Okay, enough was enough. The red team needed a hero, and there was only one person willing to pick up the torch. Swapless jumped into action to bait out cooldowns before leaping into a meteor strike. He carefully lined up his ultimate in an attempt to take out the enemy team's source of never-ending healing, but accidentally yeeted off the map once again. Listen man, if you play such a skill-demanding character like Doomfist, then messing up a combo or 2 can happen. It's just hard to blame the guy. Plasma going out of his way to teabag our hero showed just how much of an impact he had on the course of this match, clearly getting into the enemy team's head. But once again, his departure illustrated how lost the red team was without his guidance, and the fact that their Zenyatta could careless the frontline really was a testament to that. Kami had since sought his Sombra, but couldn't even manage to kill Plasma while he was completely stationary, allowing for his Ana to turn around and out-heal the damage. Ladies and gentlemen, this round was looking rough. The blue team now had their payload firmly under their control. Swapless made an attempt to carry his team once again, but thanks to his cowardly tanks not pressing W hard enough, he ended up eliminated by the toxic Zenyatta player that just randomly spammed in his general direction. Kami would fall victim to that as well shortly after, trying to do his flanking diligence by harassing the backline, but alas, support heroes are just ridiculously overpowered. The stagger train just wouldn't stop. While most of the red team was getting borderline spawn camped, Swapless and his brigade was stationed on high ground in hopes of being able to create a pincer attack once the opportunity presented itself, and their patience would be rewarded. The blue team's oblivious D.Va player was completely unaware of our hero's presence, boldly pushing in on Uber Cup without realizing that they would have to contend with Swapless and his brigade bodyguard as well. A position I had to fight tooth and nail for to get by skillfully disposing of the enemy soldier with a 1-2 combo. Their D.Va realized too late what they had to deal with and ended up blown off the map. But amazingly, their booster cooldown came back just in time, allowing them to get back into the fight by combining it with their ultimates. Of course, our hero would now let them Goomba stomp on his team, making short work of the blue team's off tank, and as such, open up this fight. The red team was hell-bent on supporting their carries, so as soon as they caught up to the payload, Kami translocated into the enemy backline for a massive EMP to eliminate the defender's supports. Though there was one wildcard the red team did not consider: Inferno. Together with our Hanzo, the enemy Sigma had stopped our hero's own support line from catching up to the rest of them, and that will be an even bigger deal in light of the fact that the enemy soldier was back on high ground to apply suppressive fire to assist their Sigma. It is true that both teams had lost their supports, but since the defenders had a massive spawn advantage, it was only a matter of time until our heroes would fall victim to the lack of healing. Their time bank did not allow for such blunders, and as such, the defenders came out victorious in the first round. Being stopped just shy of the second checkpoint was definitely frustrating, but most assuredly nothing to lose hope over. 119 meters covered was respectable enough, and it's not like the red team can't abuse the same spawn advantage that ended up being their downfall. Now, what does worry me a bit, however, is that Kami decided to start this round off on Bastion. I always have a hard time telling if people do that out of frustration or as a legitimate strategy, because if there's one thing that spectating these matches has taught me, it's that Bastion is a force to be reckoned with in lower ranks. The blue team spawn, meanwhile, had been all smiles and cheers. They were clearly in control for most of this game, with our hero Swapless being the only player doing as much as contesting their reign. And it would be his job again to do exactly that. The blue team thought this game all but won already, but little did they know how many more tricks this Doomfist has up his sleeves. Granted, this was a very risky strategy. All it takes is for the enemy team to have ears to easily avoid his dive. And Lord help our hero if the attackers actually went all the way to study Doomfist rollouts. The round started with Plasma, the toxic Zenyatta main, leading the charge, and right from the get-go you can see Swapless in his peripheral vision. It's a miracle that he went unnoticed, but this allowed him to wait for the right opportunity to strike. And that opportunity was Plasma dropping dangerously low, prompting Swapless to make his move just to narrowly miss his target. Yet another miracle allowed our hero to use his remaining cooldowns to escape from the cold grasp of the enemy team's backline, leaving the Genji very confused about where he came from. But unfortunately for Swapless, that was not the only Shimada he would have to deal with, and being a trained assassin, it was very clear that there was no way for him to avoid Hanzo's onslaught. It is worth mentioning that while all that was going down, Uber Cup was once again getting absolutely deleted within the first seconds of the fight starting. Kami seemed to have expected that, playing around the geometry of the map rather than relying on his tank's barrier. Though the enemy D.Va cared little for his damage output, even after destroying the mech, baby D.Va showed absolutely no respect. Demonstrating yet again how busted tanks are compared to the undertuned DPS roster, it wasn't the Bunny Blaster that did Kami in, but instead the fact that D.Va's remake might as well just be a better Meteor Strike. Capturing the first point in as little as 2 fights was impressive, but the blue team doing it in just 1 would show how much of an uphill battle this match was. The red team's DPS barely at any time had told to confirm eliminations before somebody on the team bit the dust, making this a very difficult problem to solve. The enemies continued to push up aggressively to secure space, an easy task to achieve on the back of the red team's split spawn. More of their members would fall victim to the stagger trend, wasn't it for Swapless to swoop down and save his brigade in the nick of time. But Brig was not the only one who needed saving. Uber Cup was having a really bad time, and this defense round was not looking any better. Though once again, Swapless came into the rescue, stopping the blue team from dealing lethal damage to his main tank once more, and as such, finally stabilizing his team. The only person he couldn't help was Kami, who, after having been disrespected, showed no respect to the enemy support line, a mistake that they would pay for immediately. But it wasn't too late to turn that feat into a trade, with our hero finding an opportunity to DPS diff the opposing Genji with as little as his pinky toe showing up on his screen. Let me slow this down for you in case you missed it, because being so incredibly aware of the enemy team's positioning that you barely even even need to see them to land a punch is a sight to behold. Swapless made an attempt to build on that momentum but got his dive blocked by the enemy diva. Unfortunately, that alone was enough for Plasma to take him out once again with yet another teabag to add insult to injury. All these eliminations, while useful on paper, did nothing to defuse the blue team's momentum. This was an exercise in staying alive more than anything else, but the attackers had to be stopped or else this round was over barely after it started. The defenders were desperately trying to stop Ubercup from exploding just for once in this game, and even though it took a lot of work to make that happen, their frontline did not immediately crumble in response to the blue team's attack. Things were definitely looking dicey as both sides were bleeding manpower. A massive shatter from Ubercup was meant to finally end this engagement, though it wasn't enough to stop Plasma, the toxic Zenyatta player. The Red Reinhardt definitely got a bit overzealous. Their charge put them in a very awkward spot far away from their supports, and between a Discord rope on the back and Hanzo arrows in the knee, Ubercup would be the one to end their own streak of longevity. You think that's bad? Because things are about to get so much worse as the red team's Zarya was left to protect their backline from a nano blade. And well-intentioned as that Graviton Surge was, they were lacking the damage to follow up on it, and yeah, well, Swapless was not the only one getting unlucky. The attackers were approaching their final stretch on the back of a perfectly staggered teamfight. The spawn advantage was with our heroes, however, a spawn advantage is only an advantage if you can actually get some eliminations. There was no more time to set up any kind of plays. The red team's only hope was to brute force their way to victory, and Kami had just the right amount of firepower to make that happen, utilizing their ultimate to scare the attackers into submission before confirming an elimination on their toxic Zenyatta player, but unfortunately falling victim to their own deflected damage. Swapless had to pick up where Kami left off, slamming down on the objective with his ultimate to set up for a wombo combo against Inferno. Things were looking up for our heroes. If they can only survive a little longer for reinforcements to arrive, maybe there's still a chance for a comeback. But sadly, that comeback just wasn't meant to happen. After controlling the defense, the blue team confidently won their offense round as well with, dare I say, little retaliation. And if there's one thing this episode should teach us, it's the power of perspective. Would you believe me if I told you that originally this was the tale of a Zenyatta main rallying his team around him to fight against a Doomfist Smurf? Because in actuality, Plasma Kitten was the one that submitted this replay, and his perspective was very different from what you have seen in today's episode. But what do you know? Being very particular about the shots I present and narrate can quickly turn the villain into a hero. So let me know, did I fool you into cheering for the Doomfist player, or did you know from the very beginning that I was messing with you? I figured putting a bit of a different spin on this one could be fun, so I'm very curious to find out what you think. But until then, thank you everybody so much for watching. Don't forget to drop me a like on your way out if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you want to see more, and don't forget to ring that bell icon to not miss out on my next upload. Finally, a massive shout out to Tipsy for sponsoring today's video and supporting my channel. I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and until next time, peace!